All right, welcome everybody to this month's Portals Community Call. I'm Jason Gumpert from MS Dynamics World. Always glad to help bring you these events hosted by Nicholas Hayduk, who is also here. I'm going to hand things over to him momentarily. Just a couple of notes from my side. First, we do welcome your questions during these events. Just look for the Q&A block in the webcast interface and enter them anytime. Nick does an excellent job of keeping an eye on that as we go, and he'll take all your questions. And we are also recording today's event. We'll be sending a copy of that out to all of you after the session ends. And with that, Nick, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Alrighty, thank you as always, Jason. Let me think we're sharing here. Go over the question box. All right, let's get going here. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got a fun topic, something that's come up kind of over the years with the product, which is Liquid versus JavaScript. So let's get going. So quick introduction if this happens to be your first time joining us. My name is Nicholas Hayduk. I'm the president and a software engineer with Engineered Code Consulting Inc., based right here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I am a Microsoft MVP, and I've been working with the product, the Power Pages product, for the last 15 years or so. My career began at EDX Studio, which was the company that originally built Power Pages that Microsoft acquired in 2015. So at Engineered Code, we assist people with Power Pages implementations. We've also got EC Learn, which is our learning management system for the Power Platform, which is both works with Power Pages and model-driven apps to deliver training courses to users using the Power Platform. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, if you're interested in the content that we produce, you can follow us on Twitter or X. You can follow us on our blog, which I do about once a month. We've got our YouTube channel where we post not only the recordings of this call, but our weekly tips that we do, roughly 2 or 3 minute tips that we do every Tuesday, all related to Power Pages. We've also got our podcast that I do with George Dubinsky, called Refresh the Cache. So if you're interested in listening to a Power Pages podcast, you can check that out at crm.audio. So those are all the ways that you can get in touch with me. If you do ever have any questions kind of after one of these calls, always happy to chat Power Pages with the community. As always, just want to extend my deepest gratitude to Jason and the entire team at MS Dynamics World for their support of our call. I think we are in the 60s now in terms of these calls. We've been doing it since about 2020. And it's been a great partnership, and really appreciate all the work that his team, Jason and his team, does to keep these calls going. So, what is our agenda? Our agenda, if you've joined one of these calls before, is pretty much always the same. We've got some Portals news. In fact, you know, something new just came out today. Otherwise, we would have had no Portals news. So that's nice to see. Then we'll get into today's topic, which is Liquid versus JavaScript, as I mentioned. We'll talk about the date and time of the next community call, and we'll leave some time for Q&A. So during the Q&A portion, again, feel free to drop your questions about the today's topic in that questions block. But at the end, if you have any questions kind of about anything related to Power Pages, or if you're a golf fan and you're watching the PGA Championship this weekend, and you want to give me a tip on who to bet on, please do that as well. But yeah, any questions that you have, we can handle those at the end as well. But drop them anytime into that questions block. So, Portals news. Like I said, when I prepared these slides last night, I didn't have really any news. But as of this morning, there was one kind of, I guess I would say, a smaller announcement. This isn't going to change a whole lot of people's lives, but if you work with the U.S. government cloud, the CDN, so the Content Delivery Network, and the Web Application Firewall features are available to the U.S. government cloud now. So that post came out today. The CDN and the Web Application Firewall functionality of Power Pages are both very nice features. If at all possible, we do recommend that those are enabled at least in your production environment. the content delivery network, CDN. What that does is it distributes the static files, some pages as well that aren't changing kind of per user, distributes those across the globe, and so it makes it essentially the performance better for users of Power Pages across the world. So that's a nice feature. And then the web application firewall, that's giving your Power Pages site that extra protection. You are able to configure your own rules for that as well, whether that's kind of specific types of requests or the location of requests, that sort of stuff gives you control over that. But just enabling it kind of out of the box without your own special rules does offer you that extra layer of protection of kind of the default web application firewall rules that have been set up. So like I said, in production, to me, you got to have a pretty good reason why not to enable those. If you have a site that's already up and running and you don't have those turned on, something definitely to look into, whether you're in the U.S. government cloud or not. Something that if you can turn on, strongly recommend that you do that. Okay, like I said, that's pretty much all we had for news this past month. We had the release notes come out a few months ago. We had the release wave is now ongoing. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a few more things coming up here. We've got the Microsoft fiscal year end coming up here at the end of June. Traditionally summer might be a little bit quieter, but still expect to see a few things coming out over the next while as the release wave kind of comes to fruition. All right, let's talk about today's topic, and that is Liquid versus JavaScript. So these are kind of more on the pro code side. So some people may claim that Liquid and JavaScript are low code. I tend to think that if you're writing Liquid and you're writing JavaScript, maybe you can copy and paste some things. Maybe that's still kind of low code side, but for the most part, I think if you're writing some good JavaScript in Liquid, you're probably coming more from the pro code side of things. And so these are by far the two most popular languages that are used for customizing Power Pages. So JavaScript is well known. If you're into any sort of web development, you'll run into JavaScript. It's a client-side web development language. So that's we've got that's the code that's running within the browser. You can use JavaScript for all sorts of things. Often used for kind of DOM manipulation. So after the page is loaded, you can use JavaScript to handle events and change the look and feel of the page in different ways to make really interactive web applications. So JavaScript is used very heavily in Power Pages. Often, some of the classic use cases for JavaScript is if you want to build your own kind of validation into forms, if you're kind of building out things like PCF controls or customizing lists, often those are accomplished using JavaScript. Liquid as a technology in the kind of the broader web development space is not as well known. Liquid was actually developed by Shopify, which is an e-commerce, kind of one of the big e-commerce platform companies. So they developed Liquid as a templating language, and it became open source. And many moons ago, ADX Studio integrated that into their product. And so when Microsoft acquired that product, it came with this Liquid integration. So Liquid is a relatively simple templating language. There's not a whole lot to learn with Liquid in terms of it's got your kind of if statements, your loops, your select statements, relatively straightforward. So and the reason I say that is that if you're new to Power Pages and you've got any sort of kind of programming experience, Liquid will not be a big jump to learn. Like it's really not that overly complicated. The syntax is pretty straightforward, but it is a server-side templating language, which means that the Liquid is executed on the Power Pages server, and the result of that Liquid code is then sent to the client, to the browser. So as you'll see, that's going to be the theme of our call today is Liquid server side, JavaScript client side, and that's going to tell us, in those cases where you could do it either way, you're going to hear me talk a lot about, okay, do you want this to be client side? Do you want it to be server side? But again, if you're new to Power Pages or you don't know Liquid as well, uh, don't be intimidated by it. It is a pretty straightforward kind of templating language, and we'll talk about what I mean by templating language here in a second. But generally, that means we're using it to build, HTML. You can use it to actually create JavaScript and CSS as well. But we'll kind of dive into that more. But again, the key distinction here is going to be that client side versus the server side. So um, let's talk maybe a little bit about the similarities. So both Liquid and JavaScript can be used to read data from Dataverse. So in our Power Pages site, the backend, the database for a Power Pages site is Dataverse. So you can use both Liquid and JavaScript to get data from Dataverse. With Liquid, you actually have quite a few different options. There's an entities object where you can reference the collection of tables in Dataverse, essentially by the table name and by the ID of that particular record. You can also get access to the person who's logged in right now. And so within Power Pages, the current user is always a contact. So the user object gives you access to the currently logged in contact. You can also get access to things like content snippets. There's a settings object, so if you want to get access to site settings, you can also use the fetch XML tag to execute pretty much any sort of arbitrary fetch XML query that you want. So within Liquid, there are a lot of different ways to get access to the data in Dataverse, and you'll see here in our talk today the kind of the theme of like often we're using these tools to get data from Dataverse, and so Liquid has lots of different ways that we can retrieve our data from Dataverse. Whereas with JavaScript, if your code in JavaScript can use the Power Pages Web API. So if you're not familiar with the Power Pages Web API, it's an API based on the Dataverse API. So it allows us in our JavaScript to execute essentially an AJAX call to the Web API to retrieve data. And so using the Web API, we can either execute OData queries. So there's a syntax like a filter syntax within OData to execute that. You could also execute fetch XML. So often the question gets asked, okay, I have fetch XML that I want to run. Should I run it with JavaScript? Should I run it with Liquid? And we'll get into kind of that conversation as well. But again, both Liquid and JavaScript can be used to read data from Dataverse. And they're both can be used to create layouts. I mean, this is Power Pages. This is a web application. The purpose is to display stuff to our users. So within Liquid, there are a bunch of tags that we can use to essentially build out, these templates to create layouts within our HTML. That is really the primary purpose, but behind Liquid is to be able to write code that produces a certain set of HTML, CSS, JavaScript that produces the layout or the interface that you want for your users. JavaScript, same thing. So with JavaScript, we can manipulate the DOM, so the DOM of your particular page. You can use JavaScript to do that, to modify that. You can insert nodes, remove nodes, change nodes. You can do all that sort of stuff with your JavaScript to create the layouts that you want. So, and again, we'll see this as one of our examples. If you say you want to read data from Dataverse and output it as a table, Liquid has options and JavaScript has options. Liquid, you can query the data and then you can output the data using your templating tags. With JavaScript, you can make a call to the web API, and then you can use DOM manipulation to insert the table into your page. So this is why there tends to be some confusion or kind of some, people just don't know which one I should be using in which case. Now, let's talk about the differences. So again, we're going to get back to Liquid is server side, JavaScript is client side. And we're gonna, again, you're probably gonna get sick of me saying that, but that is going to be one of the keys here. The other big thing is that JavaScript can use the web API to create, update, and delete data in Dataverse. So we have our CRUD acronym, which is create, read, update, and delete. JavaScript can do it all. We know it can read, so it can create, read, update, and delete. Liquid is read only. So it has no ability to create, update, or delete data. So it has no ability to change the data that's in Dataverse. So that generally leads to some very easy answers. If you're looking to update data in Dataverse, you're going to be using JavaScript. If you're looking to create data, delete data, JavaScript is probably going to be the way you're doing it. Or there are some other techniques, but if you're comparing JavaScript to Liquid, Liquid just doesn't have those capabilities to make changes to Dataverse. Liquid is read only. The other thing is that we often see JavaScript again being used on Power Pages to customize forms. If you're looking at a form and you're looking to customize it, for the most part, you're probably using JavaScript. Liquid is not going to be the tool that you're using to interact with, to customize forms, add validation, that sort of thing. So JavaScript, if you're dealing a lot with whether they're the basic forms or the advanced or multi-step forms, that's where you're going to see a lot more JavaScript than you are going to see Liquid with the forms. So, like I said, actually, sorry, we've got a question here. Let me see if I can handle that first. Okay. Excellent point. So, Alexander has brought up PowerFX. So, I can talk to that briefly. So, PowerFX is a language that was it's introduced as kind of proprietary to the kind of different parts of the Microsoft Power Platform. So I think it came from possibly Canvas apps. PowerFX, think of it as an alternative to Liquid. So most of the things that I'm saying here, you can somewhat replace PowerFX with Liquid, although PowerFX has only been recently introduced to Power Pages, so is not really fully baked in Power Pages. In my opinion, we're not doing a whole lot of PowerFX in Power Pages yet. I think if Microsoft could kind of wave their magic wand and replace everyone's Liquid with PowerFX and kind of reach feature parity with PowerFX and Liquid, then Liquid would probably have not be around in Power Pages. But I do suspect we've got Liquid in there. We've got so many sites out there that use Liquid. I don't expect Liquid to be going anywhere anytime soon. But his comment about I've only seen it used to kind of show the currently logged in username. I would agree. There's not a whole lot of features to PowerFX right now. It doesn't offer the same templating capabilities that Liquid offers. So, I mean, the way I look at it is they wanted to say that PowerFX was supporting Power Pages. They can do that now, but I don't see a whole lot of people using it in production. So, but again, if you have run into a use case where you want to use PowerFX and you can get to work, for this particular conversation, PowerFX would be roughly equivalent to Liquid because it is a server-side language, much like Liquid is. I just think right now it just doesn't have much of the capabilities that Liquid has. Okay, so let's get back to server-side versus client-side. So, like I said, often the choice of which to use comes down to the pros and cons of server-side versus client-side. So, if you're kind of new to web development, if you don't know what kind of server side versus client side means, it has to do with the code that we write. Where's that code actually being executed? So when we talk about server side, that means it's running on the Power Pages server. So if you're not familiar with the architecture of Power Pages, it's kind of a classic web application architecture where you have a application server or your web server running, and it interacts with a database. And so your users make a request to the web server, it then talks to the database, and then sends back a response. So in our case, the Power Pages web application server is running in Azure, and it's talking back to its database, which is Dataverse. So when you talk about server-side code, that means that the code that we write is executed in that or on that web application server. So from the browser's perspective, or the user of that browser, from their perspective, they make a request to the server. That server runs the code and responds back with the output of that code. So the user never actually sees the code that is being executed. They see the output of that code being executed. Um, and that's going to be really important for certain kind of security, for certain situations where security or permissions are important. Um, Now, with client-side code, that means in this case, the client is the user's browser. So client-side code, JavaScript, is sent from the server to the client, and then the code itself is running within the browser. So not only can the user see all the code, but they can edit that code. They can change that code, or they can tell that code not to run. So when we're talking about having things running on the client side, there's lots of cool things you can do to make an application very interactive and easy to use. But you don't really have any sort of guarantees that that code is going to run, or that's going to run the way that you've designed it, because the user has that ability to change that if they want. The vast majority of the time, the user's not touching that code. The users are not sophisticated enough to want to change that. But you do have to work under the assumption that a bad actor could, in theory, change that code or have that code not run. So say any sort of validation done in client-side code is kind of a nice to have, but you can't guarantee that any sort of validation will run. So when we talk about, again, server side, that code is running on the server. The user in their browser never sees that code itself. They just see the output of that code. They have no opportunity to change that code. It's essentially it's guaranteed to run because the user has no ability to change that code. Whereas on the client side, any JavaScript you write is returned back to the browser, and that code is running within that user's browser on their machine. So like I said, JavaScript can create these really interactive experiences, but where things where security or permissions are important, that's often where we're going to like the server-side aspect of Liquid, because it does offer us potentially some additional levels of security, because we know that the user can't disable Liquid, or they can't change your Liquid. And the other thing to consider is performance and caching. So caching is a fun topic when it comes to Power Pages. There are so many different layers of caching, but when things are executing on the server, often the performance may be, I wouldn't even say it's better if it runs on the server, but it's different. So you have to kind of understand: do I want this particular query to happen on the server before it's sent back to the client, or is it better to send it to the client and have the performance kind of that code running on the client side of things? So caching and performance are something that we also consider when kind of deciding between server side and client side. Now, I'd say in a lot of situations, there's really not much of a choice. So there'd be a lot of situations like I talked about earlier with form validation, where Liquid is just not an option there. So it's like, yes, you are going to do that with JavaScript. If you have some really business critical validation that needs to happen, you can use other techniques like plugins to kind of validate that. But in today's discussion of kind of Liquid versus JavaScript, there's just going to be a lot of situations where one will be the obvious winner. But today let's look at some of those situations that may not be as obvious. Okay, so what we're going to do next is kind of go through some scenarios. And what we're going to talk about first is reading data from Dataverse. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a sample of just reading some arbitrary table from Dataverse and kind of look at it. Okay, how might we do that in Liquid? how might we do that in Power Pages or in JavaScript, and kind of what are the benefits of doing one versus the other. Okay, so I'm going to bring up my browser here. So I've created this page here. Right now it's basically empty. So what we're going to start off with is, here we go. I'll just close this. I'm going to open up my Visual Studio Code. Edit the site. So in my particular instance here, I've got, I'm a big golfer, as I've mentioned. Let me just sign in here so I have the right permissions. Do that. And kind of before I forget, one of the similarities between both kind of Liquid and JavaScript when it comes to reading data is that it all enforces table permissions. So we do have to ensure that we've got the correct table permissions set up to actually read the data. I'm going to go back to my page here. So I have these golf courses. I've got a table in Dataverse for golf courses. So what I want to do is, again, if I go to this thing, I've got my list here. But let's just say for whatever reason, I want to display these in my own custom table. I don't want to use the list functionality. So how might I do that with Liquid? If I do that in here, one possible way of doing that with Liquid is to execute a fetch XML query. I'm going to go here, and I'm just going to copy this here. So Liquid has the fetch XML tag. Now you'll identify Liquid in existing code uses this %bracket sign. So if I just do that, and I go fetch XML, and then you give the variable, because what this does is it ends up creating a variable in your fetch or in your Liquid that is the kind of result of the query that you're doing. Okay, fetch XML. So I'm just going to call this golf courses, and then do end fetch XML. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do next here is I'm going to grab the fetch XML necessary for my query of golf courses. I'm just going to load the XROM toolbox here for a second to grab that, because no one wants to see me try and write a fetch XML query from memory. Fetch XML builder. Thanks. Just going to connect here to here, and then I'll reshare my screen. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to create one for nh_ golf course. Didn't like that. There we go. And I'm just going to execute that. So I'm going to be lazy. Now, of course, we'd probably want to select which columns we want, but I'm just going to copy that. Do this. So this is my fetch XML tag. And then once that's done, then I've got my golf courses in my variable. Now, if I go back to here, I'm just going to copy this just to kind of show you how that might work. So within that golf courses object, we've got our results and our entities, and I'm just going to say entity variable. I'm going to say nh_name and see if we can get that going, just to prove that I can do this fetch XML query in Liquid And let me save this, go back to my design studio, preview that, see if we can get something to display here. There we go. So these are all the different golf courses. So we have our table, not very prettily formatted, but a table nonetheless. So again, what have we done here? We've just written some liquid code to gather the to execute a fetch XML query, and I've then used a fetch XML for loop a liquid for loop to loop around all those things and output this. I'm just going to say name. So that is, again, one way to query data, a very popular way to query data using Liquid in Power Pages. Now, what's important here is if I go back to my thing here, if I right-click and say View Source, and I'm just going to look for WASCAN. The important thing to see here is that if I look at the source of this page, the output of that Liquid code is in here. If I look for my Liquid, if I look for fetch XML in here, fetch XML, you'll see that fetch XML doesn't exist anywhere. There's no way for the user to see any of the code that I've written and have it display. They can't, it just doesn't exist in here. What you see is the output of that particular Liquid. Now, let's try and do the same thing, but let's do it in JavaScript. So I'm going to do liquid table. And let me just make this slightly prettier. Just put the table class on there. See if we can make that just a little prettier. And then we'll do an example. There we go. So there's our liquid table of that. And maybe let's just make this even nicer. I'm going to do /td and do that. So we have a different column, got a couple columns in there. So there we go. We have a table with a bunch of data in it. Now let's try and accomplish the same thing with JavaScript. Now to do that, and again, with JavaScript, there's 100 different ways of doing the same thing, but I'm just going to do this and I'm going to say JS table. So I'm just going to create a div here for my JavaScript table, and then I'm actually going to switch over to my JavaScript file and put my JavaScript file in here. I could, in theory, put a script element in here, but generally, if you're writing JavaScript, you want to kind of put it in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be lazy, and I'm going to copy the code necessary to call the Power Pages web API. And then go back here, and I'm going to grab this. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to put this in a document.ready. And there we go. So I'm going to be requesting nh_golf course. And I'm going to select nh_name. And we'll see if this results. Again, this is just kind of code from Microsoft that handles authentication for us. Here's a simple AJAX call to the API to get me the golf courses. So I'm going to save this, go back to here, I'm going to preview this, and I'm also going to open up my thing here, see if, so 400 bad request. Okay, so there's a couple things I got to check here. Let's see if my web API is enabled for golf course. Let me filter by my this one here. Okay, so that is enabled, but the field, got to put nh_name in there. And let's give that another try. Okay, let me check my network trace here. Response. Okay, one other thing we're going to try here, it might be golf courses. You can never, I'd have to look up the metadata there, but it might be golf courses. There we go. Yeah, so there we go. Now we got all of our data, that same data that we've made in our request. So if we go back to our code, so within our thing, we've got our response. So if we go back to here, we'll see within our response, we can go response.value. Go response.value is our JavaScript, is our JSON array. And what we want to do is we want to loop through each one in there. Function that way. And console.log, let's just start off by grabbing, oh, did I? Oh, it's that one there, okay. And it's just nh_name. So let's just see if we can get it to log out the individual names. This is probably IE and then e.nh_name. All right, let's see if I'm missing a bracket here. All right, let's see if that does what we hope. Obviously, coding on the fly always ends up poorly. Oh yeah, there we go. So now we've outputted all of that. And so going back here, we want to create that same kind of table. So what I did is I created this div here for JS table. So what I'm going to do is for each one of those, I'm going to say, actually what I'll do is, let's just save myself one step. Let's make this a table. And then basically for each one of these things, I want to add this same markup. So save that. All right. Go back here. So for each one of these things, I want to do JS table dot append. And I'm just going to do some ugly string insertion here. e.nh_name. trtd, finish the tr there. And I did an append. Okay. I'm going to save that. And I'm just going to make this table with this class just to make them the same. Let's see if that gets us a duplicate of our table. Nope, I did something wrong. Oh, jQuery is not defined. Oh, that's not, that has nothing to do with here. Okay, obviously made some JS table. Oh, I didn't save this. That doesn't, oh, right here. Overwrite errors. Try that one more time. All right, so now we have our second table here. Now it doesn't have the right T-body and all that sort of stuff, but essentially this, we could craft this to create the same exact thing. Now, the trick here is that in my browser developer tools, this allows me to look at all the things that I'm receiving from the server. So if I go back to this and I reload this, and let's just look for that one golf course here. It only appears in here once, and this is because of the liquid table. You'll see that the thing I've received from my server includes the result of the liquid code, but my table for JavaScript is empty. But let me find JS table. So here's that, here's the table where I created it, but I can also see all of the JavaScript that I've written. So with client-side JavaScript, you can see all of that code and you can see all of the logic. You can see that I'm making the web API request. You can see all of that in here. Whereas with the liquid, you just see what it's already done. When the page loads, it's right there. And that's the other thing I want to point out is, I'm going to refresh the page here, and you'll notice I get the liquid one, and then after some small delay, I get the JavaScript. And that is because the call to the web API happens after the page is loaded. So the page loads, and then your JavaScript runs, and then it's going to call that web API. Whereas the liquid code is executed on the server, so it's included as part of the response back to the user. So with liquid code, we get to the result is there immediately. Now, you have to keep in mind that it does mean that the initial load is going to be slower than if that liquid code wasn't there. So it's not that one is always faster or slower, it's that to the user, liquid will essentially slow down the initial page load because the code is running there, whereas with JavaScript, the initial page load will be faster because it doesn't have to execute those queries. But you kind of get this kind of effect where the data shows up after the page is loaded. Both can be good. It just depends on your situation, depends on how you want to handle it. But the big thing here is that the fact that the liquid code is not something that's visible to the user. The JavaScript code is visible to the user. So when you're doing things that from a security perspective that you may not want to be as visible, sometimes liquid can be better for that. So again, going back to my, oh yeah, someone's closed, sure. Can we close the Copilot tab? Always happy to close the Copilot tab. There, thank you for that. So going back to my things here, so we kind of covered how do we read data from Dataverse. In this case, I was just pulling all of the data, but using the web API, using Fetch XML, you can use the web API to query specific records. But you'll see kind of displaying a table in Dataverse or of Dataverse data. It works for both, but they're just kind of, it's a different way to do it. So some of this may just come down to which way are you more comfortable. If you come from years and years of JavaScript, you may kind of prefer the JavaScript way of doing things. If you are kind of new to it, Java or the liquid way might be more comfortable for you. Yeah. So we've got the web API. The other thing to keep in mind is this required me to enable the web API. And one of my recent blog posts were about, which of these two methods do I kind of prefer? I generally, all other things being equal, I prefer the liquid way. Opening up the web API is something that I prefer not to do unless we need it. And generally that when I say need it, that's to do the create or the update or the delete operations. Whereas with just reading data, Liquid can do that, and it can do that without opening up kind of the hole that is Web API. There have been some recent kind of vulnerabilities with Power Pages, and generally they may be related to the Web API. So if you don't have to open up the Web API, that's usually a good thing. So just something to keep in mind as well. I generally prefer to query my data using Liquid if I can. Question. Are there any differences on JavaScript being visible to the user if you keep the JavaScript code in a custom component web template instead of on the page directly? No. JavaScript will always run in the user. So again, I'll repeat the question. So is there any difference on JavaScript being visible to user if the JavaScript is in a custom component, PCF control, web template instead of directly on the page? There's a slight difference, but not a significant difference. The slight difference is that it may be harder to find that code. It may be in an associated JavaScript file, or there's ways to kind of it basically comes down to security through obscurity, which is we try and put it in somewhere where someone's not likely to look, but it's definitely still there. When it comes to Power Pages, all of your JavaScript code that you include in there will end up somewhere in those browser developer tools. So when you open up a page like this, somewhere in the sources, you'll find it. It may be harder to find. You may have to poke through some things. It may be in a minified version, so it may be slightly harder to find. But that's not really something that a security expert's not going to be like, oh, you've hidden it well enough. Someone probably won't find it there. It's like it's either visible or not, and so making it slightly harder to find is not going to kind of make anyone on the security side feel too much safer. So the short answer is not really any different. Question: do PCF controls have access to Liquid, or can they only use JavaScript? They essentially can only use JavaScript. PCF controls do not have any sort of concept of Liquid. They're basically inserted as a kind of a JavaScript library. So no, you cannot use Liquid within a PCF control kind of natively. You can kind of use what we've done is when you need to pass something that needs to say read data and we didn't want to use the web API, you can kind of use them together, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. But no, natively, like in your actual PCF control library, you cannot use Liquid in there. Okay, a couple other things I want to go through. So again, back on the topic of security, and this is a blog post I have from how many years ago? 2018. So wow, 7 years ago, still very relevant. And it's the idea of having a conditional form. So one of the things that you can do with Liquid is you can insert a basic form or a multi-step advanced form onto a page. With Liquid, and one of the limitations with forms is that on a single page there can only be one form. If you try to put a second form on the page, the second form is not going to render. But what we can do is we can actually conditionally put those forms on the page. And so the example I have here in the blog post is, let's say that you have a particular record or a particular form, a list that you want loading that loads a bunch of records. Some are active and some are deactive. And if the record is deactivated, you want to show a read-only version of that form. If the record is active, you want to show a editable version of that form. In a model-driven app, that would just kind of happen automatically. That does not happen automatically in Power Pages. So what you can do is use a little bit of Liquid code to make that happen. Because what you do is you can put in a Liquid if condition that checks what the status is of it or whatever conditions you want. And then you can say, if it meets this, then output the Liquid code to display the form. Else, if it doesn't meet that, put out the read-only form. And because this executes on the server side, the server only, or the user only ever sees one of these two forms. So there's no worry about there being two forms on the page because there really is only ever one form on the page. So this conditional logic using Liquid is not something we could do with JavaScript. With JavaScript, what you'd have to do is have both forms on the page, and then kind of hide it with JavaScript. But at that point, it's too late because the client, the browser will have received both forms. The second form wouldn't be there because it can't load two forms at one time. And so if you tried to show the second one, it's not going to be there anyway. So you can use Liquid to do things like this. And this is also much more secure. If you were to do that in JavaScript and someone wanted to pick the other form, they could just use the browser developer tools to unhide the one that they weren't supposed to have access to. Where in this case, the user only ever gets the form that they were supposed to get, because all of this is executed server side, and the user doesn't have the option to change the way that works. So using Liquid to conditionally display your form is a great technique that is exclusive to Liquid. The last thing I wanted to talk about here, specifically with regards to kind of Liquid versus JavaScript, is while Liquid is very useful for things that are directly related to Dataverse, there are some capabilities of Liquid that make it useful for things that are not even directly related to Dataverse. And so one example I will give you is, let's just say on this page we want to put a little text box. Input type equals text. So I'm going to save that, go over here. What happened there? Oh, didn't save again. Got to keep an eye out for that. All right, there's a little text box. Let me throw that in a div just to make that a little cleaner. Now, what if I wanted to pre-fill the value based on a query string parameter? So let's just call it test. So what could I do here to make that kind of pre-fill with that value? Now, if I were, let me just put an ID on here. Just call it nh text box. So if I were to grab this, I could write a little bit of JavaScript that does that. I'm going to throw that in the document.ready. And I am going to get the param. So I'll just leave it as my param. And then I could do what did I call it? nh text box dot val my param. So I now have some JavaScript that's executing when the page loads, that goes to the query string parameters and gets one called my param and sets its value in there. Let's see if we can get that to work. Make sure that's saved. I'm learning slowly. Okay, and then I just got to do that equals, haha. So you can see I've got the JavaScript that's filling in that query string parameter based what's in there. Now, as we talked about earlier, there is that kind of slight delay because it's in the document ready. We could get rid of that by moving out of the document ready, but that's something it's executed on the server side. If I were to reload this thing, you'll see that the value here is empty. So it starts off empty and then the JavaScript updates it. Now, Liquid actually has a way of getting the query string parameters. So I can do request.params, and if I do my param, save this here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it my param2, just so that it doesn't kind of get confused with this. Go back to here, preview. All right. So if I go my param, so if I do that, that's the JavaScript doing it. But if I do my param2, didn't like that. What did I screw up here? Request.params my param2. Let me just load this up. My param2. Oh, see, oh, sorry. It was there. Let me just load this. But it's getting replaced by the JavaScript code that doesn't have this. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So you can see there it kind of flickers away because it gets replaced with the empty thing. My param2. Oh, it didn't. Power Pages, sometimes the best. There we go. So now, and if I right click view source on this, you'll see that the input, whereas this was the other one where the value was empty and then was added with JavaScript, this one is filled in and it's right there when the page loads. So this really has nothing to do with Dataverse or anything like that, but there are features within Liquid that can help you do things that are just a little bit cleaner. If I had the choice between this or some JavaScript that updates a thing, I'd probably generally prefer this Liquid method. Okay, question here. Do you have some resources that cover best practices for using Liquid and JavaScript for Power Pages? When to use, when not to use, when to use together? Is there such a thing as too much customization when the client asks for it? Okay, great question. Let me just get to that. I'll just finish up with the rest of my presentation here because I've got a couple more things to go through. But yes, I will definitely get that answered. So we've been through some scenarios. Now, this kind of brings up to Gary's point here. Often the best answer is using them together. So it's not of like, should I use Liquid? Should I use JavaScript? It's I should use Liquid and JavaScript. And so the way that that's typically happens is you use Liquid to create your JavaScript. So some examples of that is you can use Dataverse data or get Dataverse data into client-side code as variables or as JSON. So similar to how I did this, where I this one here, I gathered this like this. Another option is if I want to pre-fill it, I'm going to put another input down here where I'm going to do golf courses.results dot entities 0.nh_name. So this is kind of a mix of HTML and Liquid, but you can also do a similar thing in here. So actually, do you know what I'm going to do? Forget that. Overwrite this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to go back to this. And instead of using JavaScript to get this, I'm going to say const my param is equal to that. So you can see here I'm mixing Liquid and JavaScript. You have to worry about the different types of quotes there, but this const my param, I'm going to say my param here, save this, go back here. Sorry, did that save? It probably didn't. Go back here, preview this, And then if I go my param, of course didn't work, but let me just see this. My param. Oh, request my params was not properly terminated. Oh, I didn't. What did I do here? Oh, yeah, I'm missing one of those. Copy and paste. Oh, that actually saved properly there. There we go. So now it's filled it in. So this JavaScript contains some liquid. Again, this is where it's important to understand the difference between server side and client side. So when I look at the source of this page, I'm going to look for haha 2. You can see that if I look at the source of my page, it just says const my param equals haha2. It has no idea that liquid was there. It doesn't care. I've mixed my liquid and JavaScript together. So I've written liquid that produced an output here. So that's why I had to surround this by the single quotes. If I hadn't done that, I would have created invalid JavaScript. So I'm using this. You have to think the server runs this code, produces the output, and puts it in here. So you can use liquid logic, you can use if statements within your JavaScript in liquid that can say check users roles, add additional validation. You can do lots of things by mixing your JavaScript and liquid together. So even though the title was liquid versus JavaScript, often the answer is liquid and JavaScript. Okay, so let me just go to this. We've got our next call scheduled for June 19th. And let me again thank you to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World. I know we're over time here. Let me just see if I can answer a couple of these questions here quickly. So in terms of best practices, when not to use, when to use to get together. So I do have lots of blogs and videos on these topics. I'm not here to sell things, but we have a training course that kind of gathers all of those different things and kind of puts them out in a kind of a structured way. So if you're looking for some training, we do have a training course, a paid training course offering that we have it. Otherwise, in terms of resources, um, between my blogs and my videos, I have lots of these different tips. So the conditional stuff. We have the liquid versus JavaScript blog posts. So again, it's kind of a combination of all of my kind of various blog posts and tips. To the question, is there such a thing as too much customization when the client asks for it? I mean, probably yes, but generally no. I mean, rarely will like it's more about is Power Platform or Power Pages the right product in general if there's going to be a whole lot of customizations. I've seen cases where I would not have recommended Power Pages, but rarely am I saying to a client, hey, no, I'm not going to do that. I think we've crossed a line here. So for the most part, if you're doing it properly, I've seen some very, very heavily customized Power Pages that I'm quite comfortable with. So I think generally the answer is, for the most part, no. You can customize it. If the client wants to pay for it, they understand what the the implications, the maintenance of it is. I don't think that you can say this is too customized. I'm not willing to do this. And then we got one more question. Is it best to use Liquid for, say, a portal payment process? Liquid's not going to be very helpful for a payment portal process. A portal payment process because it only can read data. So when we're talking about payment, often we have to do either Web API, companion app. Liquid can be somewhat helpful, but it's not the answer generally to a total payment solution because you're often having to create data, update data when you're kind of confirming the payment. So Liquid can be helpful, but it's not kind of the answer to that whole kind of thing. All right. I know we're a few minutes over. I think we've answered all the questions. Really appreciate everyone being here today. Hope to see you in June. And I think we can wrap it up there, Jason.
Yeah, great job as always, Nick. Thanks everyone in the audience for so many questions. It sounds like you made some believers out of some of the portals developers and builders here. So thanks again. We're going to end things there. Bye, everybody.
All right. See you, everyone. Thanks.